guys alive.
I am excited to present my next guest on this podcast, Bruce Maier. Bruce is joining us to talk about planning financially for special needs children. Bruce is managing partner and financial advisor at Birch Advisors, which is a private wealth advisory practice of Ameriprise Financial Services. Bruce is a financial consultant with over 30 years of wealth management and financial planning experience. His practice focus is working with families that require special needs planning. Bruce, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you, Adam. Pleasure to be here.
For many parents, visualizing how their dependent child with a disability will live after they are gone is a very difficult thing to do. What are the first things you want parents to know about the special needs financial planning process?
Well, Adam, I think I want to first address my definition of special needs. I think it's the crux of planning. And my definition that I ask every client is there someone in your family that may not be financially independent? And I'm going to repeat that again. Is there someone in your family that may not be financially independent? So many times we view special needs and we associate it with autism. But based on the question that I have just posed, it really opens up to a wide range of community with people with physical or mental deficiencies. Let me give you one example. I had a client whose son was bipolar. She said to me, quite frankly, when my son takes his medication, he's fine and financially independent. When he doesn't take his medication, he's not financially independent, and I can't control that. So in reality, she said, I would never have viewed my son as special needs, but all of the planning is the same. So posing this question to families early on really sets the tone on how I then start planning. I mean, we are looking at individuals plan for the worst, hope for the best. Most importantly, do not think anything is irrevocable. And the key is where parents are in planning, we're planning for 2 generations. And the other objective, it's flexible, and what you do and what I do, our objective is for Johnny to mainstream, Johnny to get married, Johnny to go to college. But just in case, what if not? And I think both of us have these backstops that we can really put into place when we get that opportunity to talk to clients, but most importantly, when we get them to answer that question and get that reality check that, yes, I do need to plan.
Absolutely. It's very true, and it's a helpful definition to keep in mind. We sometimes think about special needs more narrowly than is the case, and it's good to keep a full picture of who this potentially applies to. What are the legal instruments needed for planning financially, Bruce?
So I will tell you the absolute key is to have a will. If there's a typical family and if the individual or parents die without a will, it's not easy, but there's a workaround, and it can work, let's say. If there is a situation where there's a special needs child or sibling or brother or sister or aunt, uncle, and there is no will, Adam, it's catastrophic. And it has to be addressed. So that's the very first part. I have this one question that I do at seminars, and I pose the group, and I said, I'm going to ask a question that's probably the only question that has a unanimous response. And people are looking and saying, what could that question be? And it can even be, I could pose, is the earth round? And there'll be some people that still think maybe it's flat. But the one question that I pose, can anyone predict that they will be here tomorrow? Honestly, it's the only unanimous answer to a question. Be that said, we need to do a will, and we need to do a will sooner than later. So that's the key of really starting. Secondly, of financial planning is to make sure that the individual does not have any assets in their name over $2,000. So all of the legal instruments that you work on or that we present to families to reach out to you to do is The crux of financial planning, Adam, is to make sure that our special needs individual never ever get disqualified from any federal or state aid that's available to them. Whether they need it or not doesn't matter. It has to be available to them. And honestly, we as parents, when we're not there, we're not going to have that choice. So we must make that transition easier for loved ones around. So the key is to structure these types of legal instruments that make sure the individual does not have assets in their name. And we can go into detail further on during this on how you get into the right types of vehicles. But the key is it's a $2,000 limit that an individual cannot have as assets on their name. It's crazy. It's an amount that everybody is shaking their heads, and hopefully change will be, but still in all, that amount stays. So when we have families coming to us and say, what is the next step? We provide certain things called trusts. We can go into detail afterwards, but that's the part of the legal of setting up these trusts, that it is not directly in Johnny's name, but the trust is there to supplement for Johnny's needs going forward.
I think the point you just made is one that's going to be emphasized repeatedly throughout this episode, that special needs children are entitled to government benefits, and the purpose of this planning is to make sure that they can continue receiving those benefits and also have money or funds set aside for their financial future without jeopardizing those benefits. So very important point that we're going to be coming back to. You mentioned trusts. Why don't you talk a little bit more about what is a special needs trust?
Absolutely. And to go back, it is the crux of planning. And a special needs trust, and many times it could be called a supplementary. And many times families there are words and there are terms that are in the financial profession or the legal profession that sometimes are overwhelming. And then when we simplify these terms to really what they mean, crystallizes for families to say, oh, this is really what it means. And here's where I'm going to bring one of the special needs trusts. Most of the time, they're called supplementary needs trusts. So initially, people go, I don't understand what supplementary needs trust, and they're off. Let's look at it. Supplement. The trust is there for funds to be in to supplement Johnny's life, not to support. We have done everything for government regulations and federal, because we don't have more than $2,000 of assets in their names, where the government will support. That is food, clothing, shelter, different types of programs. These are all given by the government if the individual does not have more than $2,000 in assets. All federal requirements. So now doesn't the word supplement come into a little bit more play? The funds in the supplementary needs trust will be there to supplement Johnny's life. What are they? Add to a computer, maybe, additional health care, whatever. In some cases, again, disability based on my definition of may or may not be financially independent. I didn't say dependent, I said independent. That's key, and that's what most parents have to realize. Disabilities run the range. So maybe that supplement is maybe to provide a mortgage in an individual's home for that individual. Again, not dependent. Maybe that individual is not totally independent. So this is to supplement, and if legally prepared correctly, all of the other government programs available are still there. So we have the best of both worlds in that. So that's the key of a special needs trust. Going forward, of supplementary needs trust. That's built in to the program.
You're doing great. I'm just hearing some background noise. I want to let them know real quick. Hang on, okay?
All right, it's probably upstairs for the audio. I'm gonna do some more
Did you complete your answer?
I'm
or was
good.
it? Okay,
I'm
you're
good.
good there. Good. Very good. Great so far, Bruce. Okay. All right. Bruce, can you provide an overview of the different types of government assistance?
I'm glad you asked that question. There are two types of government assistance, and it's measured on something called means tested and non-means tested. And let's go a little into detail. Again, simplifying this word, it's not overwhelming for parents. And what it is means tested is really looking at the assets of the individual themselves. And this is where the $2,000 limit comes in. It is a means tested. It is the government tests the means of the individual, and if they have more than $2,000 of assets, they become disqualified. And this is ongoing. So even if they were in a program, these are yearly tests or even monthly tests that the government will do different types of audits to see that these assets haven't gone over and above. So I don't want parents to think, okay, my child doesn't have $2,000 of assets now, applies, never gets disqualified, everything's great. No, and this is, again, the key of the planning. We never can see that assets increase over and above 2,000. What happens then? Two things. Government can say, no more programs, we're done. You become disqualified. And when you get down to that level, then you get back in the program. But that means you go back of the line. Anyone that has a special needs situation probably will be shaking their heads. You never, ever want to go to the back of the line again. So the key of our planning is really never to get to the back of the line. And these are the things that both we do financially, you do legally to structure. So that encompasses the trusts, that this is a funnel for dollars to go in. What happens if something happens and Johnny gets added money? Where can this go? It can go into trusts. It can go different accounts where the government will not, these are protected assets, where the government will not include them in their means tested. Let me go into, I think it's a good transition now to just go into a little detail of when means tested comes into play. And this is really when an individual becomes 20 to 21. There's something called ages out. And that's when the government says, okay, this individual, we're going to use the means tested. Before that, it was all educational pride. You know, in this country, education is provided to anyone, no matter what, up until the age of 20, 21 in the world of disabled individuals. After that, you age out. When you age out, you're not entitled to any of the educational types of programs available. That's not to say that you're not going to be eligible for other programs based on that individual's age. Job training, job transition, different types of interviewing skills, group home, a change of life at that point. But let's just go through that. I think it's a good point to just go through stages, because I'm sure there are people that are at every different stage of their life, and that's why planning is so important. So
And I just want to say that the period you're talking about is often referred to colloquially as the cliff, because they go through this long period of having education supports in place, and then they approach the age of 21 and they reach the end of their eligibility, and then they enter a new phase of having to cobble together services and benefits and start to think about funding. And so I think this is a pivotal and hugely important phase that you're talking about, and I just wanted to emphasize
absolutely, and it's key, and it's really tied into age 21. I mean, there are some really war stories that you see that there are kids that are literally taken off of a school bus the day they turn 21. It's horrible, and we know we can't control that, but at least we can become aware of it and plan. And if we haven't done the proper planning after that, and that individual ages out, what happens? The individual goes back home. The individual's complete social situation has changed. They're no longer in school. They're sitting at home. They're upstairs working on their Game Boys or computer. The whole family, Adam, the whole family dynamics change. No longer can two people work. there has to be somebody at home. The entire social system breaks down. Everything you've worked for and advocated for 21 years stops. But if you have this transitional planning, if you have done it properly, the turnkey of the availability of programs that are available, different types of transition programming that you work too on the educational side and all of that transitional planning, that an individual is ready to go when they become 21. All of the plans are available because Johnny doesn't have more than $2,000 of assets in their name. Do I wait to plan until then? No. Goes back to my initial question. What happens if something happens to you at age when the child is 4 and 5? We have to plan for 2 generations going forward. Let's just spend a moment on, if I can, on the phases of the individual, because I'm sure there are different listeners at every different approach.
Yes.
Ages 1 to 3, you're seeing your child may not be developing as quickly as you think it may be. 50% of that is, anxiety, but the other 50%, you may be reading something. So during that period is a time of evaluation. And I stress to every parent, if they think that there is something not right, don't procrastinate. Get your child evaluated. Go to your pediatricians. Go to early childhood therapists, because all of that documentation and everything that you will have will enable you to then enter the other phases, because it all goes in order. And these programs may be available. If you haven't had your child evaluated and you reach 4 and 5 years and all of a sudden now you want that speech therapy, that may not be government assisted because we didn't evaluate it earlier. So take that early. It's tough for parents. We're trying to say, okay, we don't want that. There might be a problem, but the earlier the evaluation, statistics show, the more success that our children will mainstream. My child is a special ed teacher in early intervention. Her kids are 3 and 4 and 5. They come in nonverbal, they walk out verbal. But all of those children have been evaluated before, because they've been now allowed to go into the programs in the special school that she's teaching. And the special school that's costing $95,000 a year, I don't put that down, but the government is funding that because it's done properly documentation. So 1 to 3, sometimes you have something called an FEP, a family evaluation plan. 3 on, through the educational side, 3 to, let's say, 20, is schooling, something called an IEP, an individual evaluation plan. And this is reviewed every year. Again, as I said, the federal government all has to provide an education. Most of the time they're in public schools. However, if the IEP, which is a group of people that get together for this report, it's the parents, it's psychologists, it's pediatricians, it's other teaching, it's all of those that say what your child can do and what they can't, and what training or what programs they need available to them. If that respective public school cannot provide that, and here is where your expertise, Adam, comes into play, and here is where parents should early on come to you on that side, is that an IEP is that that public school may not be able to provide that. Is that transition easy? May they need an attorney to be with them to claim that that's true? But if that is ruled for the parent, then the child's able to go to a special needs school, very similar to where my daughter teaches, that have tuitions of $95,000 and more, that are 12-month-year schools that really address that. And at that point, that transition and that IEP is evaluated every year. Attorneys are working with that. We're being involved in the financial planning of that, also involved, but it's really this educational. Our financial planning is more educational. We want to be a resource to them. So we go through this. We work with the parents. We're not in a vacuum on that. In between that, we reach guardianship is at 18, correct? Is guardianship?
Yes.
Yes. So guardianship is 18. Most parents, and then it all depends on the severity of the disability. My child may not be financially independent, but they're able to function. Well, my child definitely is not financially independent and can't function. We have to go through permanent guardianship. You can't wait till 18 to do this. This is like a 2-year process. So I reach out to every client. When your child is reaching 15 years of age, 16, we have to start the guardianship role. Too many times, Adam, parents think guardianship is a one-way street. There are different types of guardianship. There's a financial guardianship, there's a social. It's not just all cut and dry of that. But you have to go through this guardianship. And it is very hard for parents to go through this, because what comes in, it is, my view is, it's like readopting your child. They will come in, and I talk to parents right before that, and I said, this is what it's going to be. Be prepared. And so many parents come back and say, thank goodness you at least prepared me. Because when that person came in, they're doing their job, Adam. They're correct. But they're going to know, where does the child sleep, and how does he do? What does he do? And all of that. And the parents will say, I took care of my child for 16 years. How dare you come with that? But it's their job. It's the understanding. And most parents come back and say, you relaxed me. You took this anxiety away. I understood it, and I was able to ask, and I didn't get my back up. And again, you're working in guardianship too, and you're probably doing that same. So that's the transition to that. And then we hit age 20, 21, which is the aging out, and now that means tested comes in. Does the child? No longer does the parent who has $1 million or $2 million, doesn't matter. They're not looking at your assets. They're looking at the individual's assets, not being over $2,000, means tested. Two different types of government programs. Means tested, where you are measuring your assets, comes under Medicaid and SSI. Medicaid is related to health. SSI is really where parents can collect additional stipends or amounts based on their taking care of their children. Non-means tested, and by that now the word and definition is now everybody will understand. Oh, non-means tested, that $2,000 is not going to come into play. That's going to be Medicare, which we understand Medicare is not based on income, and something called SSDI, which is Social Security for disabled individuals. Similar to SSI, each individual is treated, separately. Every case is different, but those are the programs. Section 8 housing is also means tested, but that makes sense. If you apply for Section 8 housing, you're going to have certain assets that you have to not have to be eligible, hence means tested. So hopefully those words are now becoming a little bit more, clarified.
Bruce, how does a special needs trust get set up?
So this is when people turn to Adam. No, seriously. A special needs trust gets set up. I work with clients going forward. A special needs trust gets set up to going to an attorney that has the expertise. And we work together. It's a team, how to fund the vehicle and how to go, the financial aspect. But the most important, where parents shy away from, is the cost. They're always concerned about the cost of a special needs trust. Now, setting up a special needs trust really has to be done by an attorney that has the expertise. And sadly to say, if you have a good relationship with an attorney, or it's been a family friend going through, and they don't have special needs expertise, you have to make the step and say, listen, I cannot use you, or I need to get other people involved in this process. So please look for somebody that has special needs expertise, or if they have elder care. If they have elder care, there's some. And as you go through and you're looking at that, do your own homework, but look at attorneys that have that in their list of specialties. They got to have special needs planning associated with the attorneys. Now we go with costs, and people shy away from costs. It's an expense. I'm not going to shy away. You cannot do this for online and do your own will, and you can't pay $500 for it either. But most of the time, this is a one-time cost. It's controllable. It's life-changing for you. I have to give you one example. I talked to clients, and when one client said, I have a problem with this amount of money, I was managing their account. I said, I'm going to stop your retirement contributions for X amount. When we reach the amount of what the attorney's fees are, we'll turn it back on. Because honestly, Adam, if you've not done this planning, the retirement money doesn't matter. You're going to have a lot of other problems before you get to that.
Right.
So focus, do your priorities, be that as it said, it is not overwhelming the cost. It really isn't. But do not go for fear of what the cost would be.
Let's pick up on a term that you just mentioned, which is funding the trust. What does it mean to fund a special needs trust? How do parents go about this?
So funding a trust is important. Too many times, individuals will come to me and say, I'm all done. You were never all done. That's one thing, and I'm going to refer to that a couple of times because it's an important point, and I'm going to stress it. But their perception, and even sometimes attorneys' perception, because that's their role and they've completed their task, okay? But the idea of it's a two-part. You can set up the trust, but you have to find the vehicle to fund the trust. And these are different vehicles. I'm going to give a couple of examples of what types of vehicles. So we have to set this in motion that these funds will be available whether you fund it early on, whether you fund it at time of death. We can discuss that going forward. But they have to be identified as what funds, okay? Let's look at a typical family. And it's a very interesting when individuals are determining what part of my assets do I need to fund this trust versus the assets that are going to go to my other children or my other beneficiaries. Typical family, let's say, the typical parent's response is, I have 3 kids, I'm going to give a third, a third, a third. And it doesn't matter what types of assets there are. In a special needs situation, we have to drill down a little bit more. We have to identify and prioritize which assets go to Johnny or Johnny's trust and which assets go to my other kids. And it all goes back down to the original definition, may not be financially independent. So let's just take an example of certain assets that we all have, okay? We have our house, we have our retirement assets, we have cash, we have life insurances. Those are your basic assets that you have, okay? Do I want to leave my home to Johnny's trust? Because maybe when I pass away, the market might not be that good. It might take time to sell that asset. Back to the definition. Johnny's not independent. Can't wait for those. The trust can't wait for that. Because, guys, you're no longer here to supplement or to fund. So let's look at the type. A house may not be the appropriate type of asset. I'm going to the prioritizing of assets. Retirement assets. Retirement assets did have a tax component that when somebody inherits a retirement, there are taxes involved. Again, Johnny's not independent to pay these taxes. My other 2 kids, maybe they'll inherit a little less or whatever. There's been a little change in retirement assets. We could do a whole other situation on that. While it was not good to have retirement assets, now with Secure Act, and I don't want to go into too detail and whatever, we do have to reevaluate whether retirement assets might be an appropriate asset to leave to the trust because there are some tax limitations that they don't have to pay taxes when they inherit it. It's called stretches that you don't have to pay. They've put in that individuals have to pay it within a 10-year period. But if the individual, or namely the trust, is disabled, that stretch goes away, and you can really stretch out those taxes. So as individuals, and even if individuals have been already advanced in their planning, let's reevaluate that and talk to whomever, your advisor, talk to us or whatever, saying, I might do a little switch on that because it's just been the past 2 years that we should focus. Other assets, marketable, volatile assets. Do I want Johnny to inherit? I can't time when I'm dying. Do I die when the market crashes and those assets are not at a low point? I don't want the trust to inherit that. Johnny's not independent. My other 2 kids, it's fine. They can wait. So again, look at the different types of assets. I'm keying into an insurance policy to be probably the best vehicle to fund, not a term insurance, because again, that expires and we don't know when we're going to pass away. So permanent insurances to be where the beneficiary is not Johnny, the beneficiary is the special needs trust of Johnny, okay? But let's look at the 4 positive natures of the insurance. Number 1, it's a defined amount. Whatever death benefit you have, not going to go down. Not going to go up, but you control. So you control that dollar amount that for your financial planning that you have. 1, peace of mind. 2, not taxable. Also peace of mind going forward. Number 3, the most important, insurance policy is paid within 1 or 2 weeks. That's crucial for a trust to get these funds as quickly as possible, because everyone's now shaking their head. They know the original question. Johnny's not independent. He needs his money faster. If things have, and not probate. So when you have all of those positive things, it creates the efficiency of the proper vehicle. Again, every situation's different. Everyone should talk to their attorneys, their financial advisors, but don't say you're done if you haven't identified the vehicle to fund the trust.
How much do you have to put into the trust when you open it?
So this is a good question, and you may not have to put anything in the trust. And again, planning comes up or however. Remember, this trust is to supplement Johnny's life as long as parents are alive and they're managing and they're going, to be able to supplement the trust. Unless they have dollars, you can find some dollars that were just sent to Johnny by lack of control or an inheritance that Johnny may have gotten or different things. Those things have to go into the trust very quickly because, again, we can't have anything in Johnny's name. So the trust should be established. Trust accounts can be established too and can funnel when funds want to come in there at your choice. But the key is if you've identified vehicles of when to fund the trust, they can really be at the time of your death. And here's the other word that people think, and that we can really drill down to the word. They're called springing trusts. And again, most people say, I have no idea what a springing trust is. I'm not going to look at it. I don't know. A springing trust is that this trust comes into effect when the will comes into effect. So when you pass away, the dollars or the assets you have identified to go into the trust springs into effect. So now springing trust doesn't become so overwhelming. It springs into effect when the person dies, the will comes into place. The springing trust, as you know, is incorporated in the will, and then the assets are defined to go into the trust. So as to timing, respective to every individual, they may want to say, I want to be done, I want to have X dollars to go in. Fine, those are. We manage special needs accounts. But most of the time, there does not have to be an initial amount. But vehicle has to be set up, and vehicle has to be identified.
Bruce, paint a picture of how you work with your clients.
So I really, first and foremost, I want to be a resource to the clients. I'm looked at as that individual to be early identified, and hopefully that question that we pose again makes it early identifiable. Come to me as a resource. Let me spend time with you to understand your situation, to have us have an educational process similar to what we're doing here and making parents aware of what needs to be done. And then I start building the team. The team will be my first is, of course, as we identified, the will and the legal aspect involved.
Even before you get there, that initial step you mentioned of being a resource and giving information is so valuable in and of itself, because parents oftentimes know they need to do something, know on a gut or intellectual level that they have to plan financially for their child's future, but they don't know where to begin. They don't know who to contact. They don't have the information that they need.
Correct. And it's getting the word out, but that is the first. I mean, it's very interesting where early on, and I talked to a number of pediatricians, and I really stress to pediatricians because that's the first place parents go. Parents will go right away to a pediatrician if they think there's something not right, and they look at a pediatrician to be a very source of information and resource. And I really find the pediatrician to be so important in some cases to say, you know what, we have to start planning also. The reality is the pediatrician, or as any doctor, can have the advice of what the future is going to be, whether we like it or not. But I've seen many pediatricians that are coming in saying you do need to educate yourself. You need to be an advocate. But once you get educated, and once financial planning is really done on a one-time basis to start, we continuously monitor it, but the objective is do the financial planning, spend the time now that you may need to do that right now, pay the money that you might need to. But once done, you can now focus 100% of your time on Johnny. You can't do, but if you're spending 100% of Johnny and you're not planning and you're getting ahead of yourself, it's not worthwhile. The stress that I want to do is on siblings, and I think so many times I do want to bring that up. Being a sibling of an individual is special, and that's also planning, and that's also important in the legal process. And we'll go into a little detail of trustees and things like that. But the key is you want the sibling to want to take care of their special needs sibling as opposed to have to take care. And it's a very strong way, and I want people to realize that. Have to, want to. And the key of what my approach is, and that's where I want to start early with siblings and things. We got to do this as a whole family operation in the sense of communication. And I alluded to building a team. The team building of building attorneys and building other caregivers, et cetera, is I sometimes focus myself as being a general contractor. What does the general contractor do? He sets the plan. He says, this is the way we're going to build your kitchen, all right? Now we need the people to get the cabinets, the floor, and everything else, and the plumber. And, oh, by the way, we need all of the government regulation to make sure that we get the permits. It's very similar. So I'm getting the attorney to put the cabinets in, et cetera. Or we're doing the attorney to make sure that the regulation is there and we'll get the permit. So
I don't know any attorneys who know how to put cabinets
exactly.
in.
But that's how we're trying to build that. We're building that team, and then everybody's working together in communication. But we got to reach out to the siblings too. I really think in my next life, where I'm really thinking of writing a book, being entitled really The Lost Generation. And why I say that, I say the lost generation is being a sibling of a child with special needs. And while it sounds heavy, is the burden that these siblings take on in their lives is overwhelming. And they don't. I really, every time I do a plan, and it depends on the age, I ask to speak to the siblings. And if the parents say, and it all depends on age and that going forward. But when I tell that sibling that parents have done everything in accordance, that they've done the proper planning, that Johnny will never be disqualified, that the funds are there to make Johnny's life supplement, everything's there. And your job as a sibling is really just to, love, take care, be the social aspect of it, and just be there. And I think it's so important, and you see the brick that is lifted from a lot of siblings when we open the communication. I honestly tell, it depends on the age. I say to a sibling, when you're dating, at what stage do you tell the other person that you have a special needs sibling? First date, second date, third date? And honestly, Adam, you see the individual really relating, because it's never a question they're going to ask their parents. Never. So let's just be that person. Let's be that, out there to be able to talk to that individual. And I say, if you're comfortable and all the planning has been done and everything has been okay, you're going to be easily to be able to say that on the first date, and you're going to take this baggage off. And honestly, Adam, if the person on the other side is still not comfortable, that's not the person you want to be with in the first place. But that's the key. And siblings, we really need to address that too.
I have to say, it's really striking a chord with me. I'm sure it's striking a chord with our listeners. I hear this so often from the parents I represent, how helping their special needs child is affecting the other children in the family, and the dynamics that are at play when support or attention is going to one child, sometimes at the expense of that child's siblings. And lost my train of thought, but I'll get it back in 1 second. What a relief it must be for the siblings to know that the financial planning is taken care of, and they can focus on being present and loving with their brother or sister or sibling.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this goes through, it's not only age related. I have many clients that have siblings that are elderly and older, and they're relating to that too. And, grandparents making the right planning. This is a multi-generational type of situation that we have to do planning. But siblings so often get overlooked, and it is so important to address what they're going through. Not only have we established, have overcome 3 years of a tough time of anxiety and mental wellness, and it's not just a disability and special needs, it's affecting all of us going forward. So talk about an individual that has a special needs sibling and dealing with their own anxieties, as we all have, and we all are doing now, and add that on. We as parents don't want that. But again, many times we as parents don't know how to correct that. Use people like ourselves to be that intervention. Sometimes I call myself a financial therapist in that. And I don't look at that negatively. It's really true. And in the long run, parents will be more at ease knowing that. So, let's look at the parent going through their stages of life. If they have done everything properly, that they know child will not be disqualified. They have done everything there that there's financial viability. They also know now that their siblings will want to as opposed to have to. Well, now the next goal is, which I then come into the process in the families because I ask what the parents' goals are. It's okay for parents to have their own goals. We're talking parents that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s. They're going to live till they're 90. I don't want a parent to always think that whatever they're spending is taking away from Johnny. They have their retirement. They have their lives to do. They have nothing to feel negative about or ashamed. But if they've done the planning, if they've spoken to people like yourselves in the attorney side, people like me, they have this peace of mind and assurance. Now focus on your life. It's okay to do that. It should be. So that's the whole role of that initial planning and how it's a holistic type of approach that you do.
What does a trustee do?
Misnomer sometimes of what a trustee does. And there's several different types of trustees involved. And there can be, and when you go through the initial legal process, you are asked to pick who you feel as trustees. We do feel that trustees, even in typical families, that anyone else there, we should pick relatively younger people or people not our own age as parents, because we want this document to last, again, for 2 generations. But a trustee can have a financial aspect, and many a times I have clients that say, okay, I have 2 kids. My one child does not know anything of the financial side, and my other child really takes care of the loving aspect and the social. So you can have trustees that are just related to the financial aspect of running the trust. And that financial aspect will be when to disperse funds, when the funds are needed to supplement Johnny's life. So they're in control of that. Then you have some other trustee that could be more of a social, that trustee is determining maybe this is the proper group home that Johnny should go in or not going forward. And then you have the other parts that are called trusted advisors that oversee the situation, and other advisors that can be replaceable. You can have a situation that you can replace a trustee, but you got to have a trustee and then a line of what happens to that person going forward. So trustees have many roles. There are also an additional trustee that can be an outside trustee. And those are situations where banks and other heirs that have fiduciary responsibilities that can act as a trustee. Many situations, you have parents that really they don't have any place to go to. They don't have other trustees. They have no other children, let's say, and they don't have anybody that's most of their would be people their age group. So they're very concerned what's going to happen with Johnny when I'm no longer there. So there's other types of trustee services that are available. There are also nonprofits that are doing this type of charitable remainder trusts and those types where individuals come in, and there's two parts of that trustee. The trustee will act as the financial aspect of it, and then the other trustee will act as the social aspect of it too. So outside trustees play a very important role. Fees are usually assessed at that point only at the time of death. There's not an ongoing fee that they have, but there are the language that these trustees have are then worked with attorneys like yourself that implement that or incorporate that into your original documentation, and then they have their trustee information when they take place. So those individuals that say, I don't want to address it because I don't even know a trustee, don't procrastinate. Really, there are different sources and there are different solutions going forward.
I just want to pause for a second. I'm going backwards to something we mentioned much earlier. You just reminded me of it. And I think this is such an important point. You've mentioned autism. You've mentioned an example of bipolar. It's not limited to those disabilities. What other issues should listeners be thinking about when they're trying to determine, does this conversation apply to my child?
Absolutely. And yes, again, I hate going back to the definition, but let's dig deep into that definition. Okay, my child.
Sorry. Let's just keep it brief and direct. Name some examples of other issues or disabilities or challenges that people should be mindful of when thinking, does this apply to my kid?
Yes. Okay. There are so many disabilities that these vehicles and these things are applicable to do. And there, government aid and all of these situations are available to a whole range of disabilities. It's the Disabilities Act, etc. So an individual. And the one thing that we have to stress also is that mortality rates of people with disabilities are the same mortality rates that you and I have, Adam. It used to be where some situation with Down syndrome or cerebral palsy or those things had to find different types of mortality, unfortunately. And honestly, in that aspect, most parents really just thought that they would outlive their children. The situation is not like that. Thank goodness. Thank goodness it's not like that. But the mortality of an individual that may have cerebral palsy or even Down syndrome or even in the autism, those mortalities can be just the same as us, so hence you have to plan. So that individual that has that on cerebral palsy, mental wellness, mental situations is a disability. It's nothing to shy away from. The word disability is not negative.
For example,
even in such the bipolar situation, the individual that might have depressions, again, they're not able in certain times to be financially wherewithal. They might need the government assistance at that point. So let's make sure this does apply to me. It's going to be applicable. And also there's one other, people, in the other extreme, deafness and blindness, there are different things that certain things have to be put into place. So it is the wide gamut.
Some parents get scared by the word Some parents get scared by the word irrevocable. What does irrevocable mean in this context? Are the plans flexible if one's life circumstances change?
In this case, Adam, I'm very passionate about that because I think too many times we look at irrevocable being this four-letter word, and tends to be that people look at this irrevocable and it turns to procrastination. And it's very evident in the autism community. They see irrevocable. They say they don't want to do any planning that is not changeable. That's the first perception of irrevocable. It's not changeable. And quite frankly, they're saying, I don't want to set the tone that I am putting for my child, for Johnny. If I do irrevocable, Adam, they're going to say that I, in my own mind, have set the tone that Johnny will never succeed. And I have this standard line that I think this is, take this brain trash and wipe it out of your head, because that's not. Do not procrastinate for that reason. Irrevocable is put into documents to make them legally viable in the situation, but it is changeable in certain things. It is flexible. Most importantly, irrevocable can be based on a beneficiary sometimes that we deem, and beneficiaries can be changed. The goal when we're doing anything, even when we're doing and Adam's doing irrevocable trusts, our ultimate goal is for Johnny to mainstream, to succeed, and to get married. But we'll put irrevocable in there just in case. Because remember, we don't have that timing just in case we're not here. So we want to put these checks and balances in, but they are checks and balances. And if Johnny mainstreams or anything, everything is changeable. So don't procrastinate because of the word irrevocable in that sense.
I'm just thinking of listeners who may be thinking, my kid is not going to be able to mainstream. And for some people, that's the case, that they're so significantly impaired that mainstreaming is not really an option for them. Do you want to add anything that addresses the people for whom mainstreaming is not a possibility?
Absolutely. I mean, those are, all of those things that fears that in individuals, I say, well, just in case my child mainstreams. Okay, my child may not mainstream and all of that. I mean, honestly, I think planning should be done in early stages, whether or not. But let's be honest, in the sense of not mainstreaming, we do have to do all of this planning early on, because again, we can't control when we're not going to be here. And most importantly, we want to control that we have everything in place that the people who will be here after we're not here will have an easy transition for my child who is not going to mainstream. So we know that this is going to be a lifelong situation. This is going to be huge for someone to assume this role. So isn't it our parents' not obligation, but ultimate peace of mind to set everything to make this transition much easier going forward? So yes, non-mainstream, same type of planning, but as soon as you can.
Do you have any anecdotes you can share about the peace of mind proper financial planning has brought to the special need families you have worked with?
I'm going to throw out a couple of examples and just touch base on some situations that happen. And a lot of it is that peace of mind when the individual thought they were all done and maybe not all done. And identifying certain things that say, oh my goodness, I didn't view that. I gave a certain situation about insurances, and we did say that insurance is the best product to have or best vehicle to have when you identify the beneficiary being the special needs trust protection. The whole goal of financial planning in all of these is really being the forensic accountant to make sure that you've uncovered everything and really have not passed up. And so many times that second opinion of throwing out certain things where people may not realize could really affect the entire planning process. And everything we've done to that point is really lost in that sense. Insurance was one. I'll give an example. A very successful doctor who had said he was all done. And I said, well, you have insurance. And he was very, proud that not only did he have his own insurance, he had group insurance. And he had group insurance and said, the hospital is giving me 5 times my salary. And he was very proud of his $1 million or $2 million insurance. And I said to him, well, who are the beneficiaries on this? And at that point, you saw the color going from his face, because he realized that 20 years ago, when he took this position, he put down who his beneficiaries were going to be. And most of the time you put a spouse, if you have a spouse initially. And then sometimes you don't even put contingent. And a very important point. In a typical situation, if you don't define contingent, it automatically goes to your next of kin. It goes to your kids. I'm sure people are thinking this right now. If you have a special needs situation and you haven't identified the contingent part and you pass away and you have 3 kids, it goes to each of your 3 kids, including Johnny. Well, we wanted to go to Johnny's Special Needs Trust, but nobody knows that, and we haven't identified that. So the whole added layer of contingent beneficiaries in a special needs situation, which we are passionate about and tell every client to go through these beneficiary reviews, and I strongly urge everybody to do that. But here was an individual who was at work 20 years ago. We all know when we take a job in the beginning, we have tons of forms to fill out. We ask 2 main questions. When do we get paid and where's the restroom? And we sign the documents then, and we know, I'll get to it later. In his situation, he had not put the contingent individuals because at that time his daughter was fine. His daughter became special needs after seizures going forward. He never addressed it. His color went down, and he said, Bruce, I'm not all done. But it was easily changeable. He just called his human resources. We have a situation where, husband who lost his spouse at age 53, he has 1 special needs child and 2 typical sons. He really thought his life was kind of over in that sense because he just was overwhelmed. And we were able to work with this planning. We were able to speak to the siblings. And he's 53 years old. He has his whole life ahead. And we were able to set the trust up, set everything, ultimate peace of mind. Couple of 2 other things. You have to talk to your parents or anything. You can do all of the documentation, but you have to be able to talk to your parents, and many times you don't want to talk about inheritances to parents. Use myself or people like me, like people like Adam, to be third party, independent, to talk to your parents of whether they've made the right arrangements in their wills. They could, in their goodness of their heart, left Johnny money because he's deemed special, all right? And they put it just to Johnny and not to Johnny's trust. And in the goodness of the heart, they did, but at the end, they really changed the whole premise of the planning and provided a lot of problems that could be. Open communication, multi-generational communication to parents. Aunt Bessie wants to leave something to Johnny because, he's considered special. And in the goodness of her heart, there's a problem. I want to stretch to one other situation on Social Security that I do want to reach out to individuals. Individuals, if you are parents and you are just entering that you yourselves are collecting Social Security, there are situations where you can collect if your child is disabled, and many parents don't know that, and that's life-changing. It all depends, and this is, again, detail. I don't want to get too into the weeds, but if an individual has a disabled child and they're collecting on their own Social Security, they can also collect half of their own to be allocated to Johnny. So an individual who turns 67, normal retirement age, not before that, and that individual has to be taking the Social Security, cannot push it out. So at any point, if they are taking it, and if your child has been deemed disabled, definition of disabled is deemed disabled before the age of 26. What deems it? Well, even if your child had an IEP or you had different types of psychological reviews or evaluation, Social Security will look at that child is deemed disabled, and then they can collect half of the child. So there's a lot of misnomers about the Social Security. Again, I think the reasons of these podcasts and these things is for really to tell your listeners to reach out to us as resources, talk to us, and uncover those things. So those are some of the important aspects and some tidbits of time.
Great. Let me ask you, is there a neutral version of Johnny that we can use maybe as a soundbite in case we want to make some adjustments later? I'm just thinking if parents are picturing their daughter or something and they keep hearing Johnny. Any ideas?
Our special needs child. Our special needs loved one. Special needs child. I sometimes refer to Johnny at that point as my go-to in the situation, But you're right. Special needs individual, I guess, or special needs loved one. I guess, to make it somewhat personalized, I'm thinking.
Okay, so give me each of those as a soundbite standalone.
I think sometimes...
In other words, just say special needs child.
Our special needs child, our special needs loved one, our special needs child that is a member of our family.
Okay, and maybe just say like, you know, I'm just trying to cover all bases for the editing. Say something along the lines of who I'm going to refer to as Johnny. It could mean your son. It could mean your daughter. It could mean your special needs child. Something like that.
You know, throughout this, I've been referring to Johnny, and sometimes it's my go-to, and I don't want a misunderstanding of Johnny. Johnny being that, you know, individual that may not be financially independent. It may be that sibling that you have. It may be even as you said, a brother or sister, a parent, and a child going forward. But Johnny is someone who is perceived special needs and perceived as that individual who's not financially independent.
Okay, sorry to have to do that. I just want to make sure we're not.
You were right.
Excluding anyone. All right, a few more, and I think we'll be ready to wrap up shortly. Hang on one second. Okay. Any special considerations for parents who are separated or divorced?
You bring up a good point. It's a statistic, Adam, that is a tough statistic, but it's a true statistic in the sense that the divorce rate runs 4 times the rate in a special needs situation. And this can be understandable, the pressures of life added on having an individual or a child with special needs. I want to stress the one part of planning in individuals that are going through the situation. And I also open up, again, being that financial therapist or having, you know, clients come to us early on, even if they are thinking that this is, and you know what, in the situation, it might be the right thing. It's not negative, or people saying, oh, I'm going to stay on just because of a special needs situation. In the long run, it may not be healthy, and it may not be healthy to siblings for going forward. But the one thing that's common, and the one thing that planning is involved in legal aspects, is that a divorced or separated couple can do the same proper planning, no matter how their relationship is pursuing. Because deep down, I do think, no matter how tough that situation can be, there is a common interest, and the common interest is the well-being of their special needs child. And I think that should be open to individuals that even are thinking about that. It's okay. And the planning can be, you know, the individual that has special needs can still be addressed. Life insurances even can be done. You can have a second to die policy even if the family is divorced, as long as the interest is your special needs trust or your special needs child. And even if 2 parents can't get along, we can be in separate rooms and sign the same documents at that point with the ultimate objective that the special needs child is protected.
I'm going to go a little bit faster now to make sure we get through the rest. Talk about the purpose of a letter of intent and life plan.
Letter of intent is not a legal document, but it really goes through the details of, you know, what it is to take care of a special needs child in certain, you know, that are not legal. And we have different publications. If anyone is interested, we can easily provide to that. There are also things online. But these go into more detail where parents can get together and others, again, making this document available when you're not here anymore, to really make it easier. Make it easier for the transition, for caregivers, for the other siblings to do this. One very quick example, and it'll really hit home, is I use the example that when Johnny gets a shot and goes to his doctor, he always gets, you know, a red lollipop. Well, we know that. We're parents. We take, you know, our special needs child to the doctor. But if we're not there any longer, and the caregiver takes the child to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician gives a yellow lollipop, and this is an autistic situation, it almost could be like no lollipop. And it simplifies it. It's really going into detail. It's not something that can be done right away. It can be done over time. Parents can get together and start composing the letter of intent to add to it as a supplement to the legal documents that you're going to do.
Any special considerations when it comes to health insurance?
Very important that individuals know. So, number one, Medicaid in the world of disability is not a four-letter word. Medicaid is very important. I think many times we view the misnomer about Medicaid as, oh, that's only for people who have no dollars. It is people that are going into a nursing home. It's the worst thing available to us. Medicaid's not a four-letter word in the world of disability. Medicaid is very important. There are Medicaid subsidized types of programs that are very important that individuals need to do. Medicaid waivers for early on that an individual have. But the key on medical insurance is if you have group insurances at your work, there is a part that you can cover your children up until the age of 26, and then they afterwards have to have their own separate insurances. However, if you have a disabled child, that child stays on your plan as long as you are working. And if you retire at age 65 and Medicare comes in, then Medicare or Medicaid will come into place to be the supplementary plan for your child. But that's a very misnomer. Don't shy away from Medicaid. Take a look at it. See if your child is Medicaid eligible. Sign them up for Medicaid. Do the Medicaid programs. These are life-changing, and these are important for every special needs parent to have.
What are the most common mistakes caretakers of dependents with special needs should be sure to avoid?
Not doing any planning, that's number one. But while if they do the planning, they may have done certain things that, again, a second opinion. Improper beneficiary designation, and we just alluded to that, of that contingent beneficiary, reviewing the beneficiaries. Some stories of disowning my child completely, that they don't get that $2,000. No, we've uncovered ways that we can prevent that to supplement, but that's a common mistake. Oh, I'm going to leave all my dollars to my other two children and they'll take care. Well, that goes back to have to and want to. Don't do that. There's also a lot of tax considerations that are sort of not addressed early on, where financial planning is important to go. Again, when we looked at the prioritizing of which assets going forward, and not having the right trust. Too many people think they have a trust, but it may not be a special needs trust, or it may not be properly worded. So what we're both stressing is the review, the continuous second opinion. Review your legal documents, even if you've had them. And if you've had the special needs trust 10 years ago, really reach out. Just get that second look to go forward to get your peace of mind.
Now, I'm sure we could spend a whole entire episode talking about ABLE accounts. We won't do that now, but briefly, what is an ABLE account and how does it differ from a special needs trust?
So I want all the listeners to really look at this. And again, it looks at any type of disability that an individual can have an ABLE account. The ABLE account is in the disabled's name. It's under their Social Security. It is looked at as that type of account, again, where government benefits will not include that in your $2,000 means tested. It's a lot flexible, very similar to a special needs trust, but it has dollar limitations in the sense that you can only put $17,000 per year, total of $100,000. But look at this as almost like a checking account for your special needs child. A way of independence, a way of sometimes getting a check that's in the special needs child's name. You don't know what to do with it. You don't want to put it in their own account. You can invest it in an ABLE account. So I urge all families to look at this online, also to reach out to an advisor, to myself, to Adam. But I really want to stress that ABLE account is really the ultimate peace of mind. It's almost like that what-if situation. It doesn't take the place of a special needs trust, but it certainly should stand next to a special needs trust as a funnel of doing, and it's investable, very similar to a 529. And I want to stress that the dollars can be used. You can take the money out of the ABLE account for expenses that benefit the disabled's life. And it's a wide range. I had one client that asked me, can I take the money out and put a down payment on the house that we want to buy for our individual. This ABLE account is widely used for people who are blind and deaf and disabled. They're even using it to purchase a car. All of these things that not get included. So I urge you all to go online, look at ABLE, reach out to us to go a little further detail. Anyone can open it up on their own for as small as $25 to start with.
What other resources can special needs parents review to educate themselves further and develop a more complete understanding?
We all know you got to be an advocate for yourself. You have to be aware of what's going on. You also have to be aware of the state that you're living in, or if you're thinking of moving to another state. And there are different organizations that are involved that will tell you this is a state that is great for individuals over 20, or this is great for individuals younger. So be aware of these organizations. Get yourself educated not only on the overall rules and disqualifications, but also looking at the state-specific podcasts that you're doing, Adam. This is the type of educational resource. The American College, where I got my designation of a chartered special needs consultant, has a number of readings out there. And look at different organizations, but be an advocate, keep yourself aware of all of those things. I do want to stress one other thing before we end, and that's on group homes and things like that. Don't look at that negatively in the sense of sign up early, even if you think that your child may not be it's not the right place. At least get them on a waiting list, and it's 10-year waiting lists on this. And when that name comes up, you do not have to choose to go to that. You can pass. But I do stress, get on the list, because again, situations get elevated when parents pass away, or situations where something needs to be done. But the only way they get elevated is if that name is on the list and not on.
That's a really important point. I'm glad you mentioned that. On the podcast episode before yours, we just had somebody discussing her experience, a horror story that she went through trying to secure a group home for her son. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. Bruce, where can our listeners get more information about you?
I have you can just, online. Have a website on Dayan Birch Advisors, or going in and just following up on my name, and there'll be a wealth of information, and contact information is available to please reach out. Again, all of these conversations, I really want to be viewed as a resource. There's no financial commitment at all, and I really urge, let's have that conversation, and look forward to speaking with those.
Thank you so much for collaborating with me on this episode. This is such an important area for special needs families to be aware of, and you've provided a great deal of information that I know will be helpful to them. I look forward to keeping in touch and finding ways of helping special needs families prepare financially for their children's futures.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Well done.
Okay?
Great.
Okay. Good.
Great
How many
job.
ums? How many ums? Not too many ums.
No, not very many. You were good. That was smooth.
The minute you say ums, it's like that. Okay, how many ums? We
Yeah.
have one individual, a dear friend of ours, and highly educated, right, and cannot finish, a sentence without the word "like" in it.
Yeah.
And this is not okay. And now you become more in tune, and then not the like, and it's not easy.
Filler.
It's
Yeah.
not easy, and it's good. Thank you. This was wonderful. I mean, it was great.
A wealth of information in there.
Yeah,
I think we covered a lot of ground.
And I hope it was simplified, not overwhelmed, not in the weeds. But this is just, again, like you said, get the people to think, and I want them to reach out to you.
You do a good job of simplifying scary terms, and I think you did it a number of times. Good. Yeah, all good. Thank you.
So the key of doing these things, any constructive criticism.